What if I told you there was a place on Earth where the stars above were completely wrong? Where astronomers would stare into the night sky and see constellations that shouldn't exist. Patterns of light that defied every map of the heavens we've ever created. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about Lake Stellaris, a body of water so remote that only 3 expeditions have ever reached it, and only one person has ever returned to tell the tale. But before we dive into this nightmare, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and felt like something was watching you back? That creeping sensation that maybe, just maybe, we're not alone in this universe. Well, what happened at Lake Stellaris will make you question everything you think you know about the cosmos above us. In 1923, a young astronomer named Dr. Helena Morrison made a discovery that would haunt her for the rest of her tragically short life. She was part of a geological survey team exploring the uncharted regions of northern Canada, deep in the wilderness where no human had ever set foot. They were looking for mineral deposits, but what they found was something far more disturbing. The lake appeared on no maps. It shouldn't have existed at all, considering the geological surveys of the area. But there it was, perfectly circular, almost unnaturally so. Its waters so still, they looked like black glass. The team made camp nearby, and that first night, Dr. Morrison set up her telescope as she always did, eager to continue her celestial observations. What she saw through her lens that night would drive her to madness within 6 months. The reflection in the lake showed stars that weren't in the sky above, not just different positions, mind you, but entirely different constellations. Stars that formed patterns she had never seen in any astronomical catalogue. The Big Dipper was there in the sky, but in the lake's reflection, it was replaced by what she described in her journal as a great serpent made of light, coiled as if ready to strike. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. Dr. Morrison was a meticulous scientist. She spent the next 3 nights mapping both the real sky and the lake's reflection. The stars above followed their normal patterns, rotating as the Earth turned, but the stars in the lake remained fixed, as if the water was reflecting a completely different sky from a completely different world. Her journal entries from those days reveal a woman slowly unraveling. On night 4, she wrote, "The serpent constellation moved tonight. I swear upon my father's grave, it turned its head and looked directly at me. When I closed my eyes, I could still see it burning behind my eyelids." The other team members began to notice changes in Dr. Morrison's behavior. She would stand by the lake for hours, staring into its depths, having conversations with empty air. She claimed the stars in the reflection were trying to communicate with her, showing her visions of worlds that existed beyond the veil of our reality. On the 7th night, something unprecedented happened. Dr. Morrison's colleague, geologist Robert Chen, was awakened by screaming. He found Helena standing waist-deep in the lake, her arms stretched toward the sky, speaking in a language none of them recognized. The words sounded ancient, primordial, like something that predated human civilization. When they pulled her from the water, she was ice cold, despite the fact that the lake's temperature was oddly warm. But the most disturbing detail was her eyes. They reflected light like an animal's, and when she blinked, the reflection lingered for just a moment too long, creating an unsettling strobe effect. The team decided to abandon the expedition immediately. They packed their equipment and began the 3-day hike back to civilization. But Dr. Morrison kept looking over her shoulder, claiming that the stars from the lake were following them. She drew constellation maps during their rest stops, sketching out star patterns that looked more like hieroglyphs than any celestial formations than by the time they reached the nearest town. Dr. Morrison had stopped speaking entirely. She would only communicate through her drawings, increasingly elaborate star charts that seemed to tell some kind of story. The symbols became more complex, more alien, until even she seemed unable to understand what her own hands were creating. She was committed to a psychiatric facility in Montreal, where she spent the remaining months of her life drawing the same star patterns over and over again. The doctors noted that she would only become agitated during the new moon, when the night sky was darkest. She would scratch at the walls until her fingers bled. trying to draw constellations that existed only in her fractured mind. Dr. Morrison died 6 months later, found in her cell with symbols carved into her arms that matched the star patterns she'd been obsessing over. The official cause of death was listed as self-inflicted wounds, but the night staff reported something far more disturbing. They claimed that in the moments before she died, her room filled with an otherworldly light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. But the story doesn't end there. In 1938, 15 years after the first expedition, a team of paranormal investigators attempted to find Lake Stellaris using Dr. Morrison's journal and maps. Were led by a man named Professor Edmund Blackwood, who had made his career debunking supernatural phenomena. He was convinced that the lake's strange properties could be explained through natural phenomena, perhaps some kind of optical illusion created by atmospheric conditions. Professor Blackwood's team consisted of 5 people: himself, 2 graduate students, a photographer, and a guide familiar with the northern wilderness. They found the lake exactly where Dr. Morrison's notes indicated it would be, unchanged after 15 years. The water was still perfectly still unnaturally warm, and still reflecting stars that didn't exist. But this time, the phenomenon was more intense. The alien constellations in the lake were not only visible, they were moving. The star patterns shifted and changed like living things, forming symbols and shapes that seemed to convey meaning just beyond human understanding. The photographer, a man named James Rutherford, managed to take several pictures before his camera mysteriously malfunctioned. Those photographs, which still exist in a private collection today, show something that shouldn't be possible. The images captured the lake's surface, showing a completely different sky. But more disturbing still, they show shapes moving among the alien stars. Shapes that look disturbingly like vast tentacled creatures swimming through the cosmos itself. On their 3rd night at the lake, graduate student Mary Catherine Walsh made a discovery that changed everything. While examining the water under a microscope, she found that it contained organisms unlike anything in known biology. They were almost crystalline in structure, refracting light in impossible ways, and they seemed to respond to her observation by organizing themselves into patterns that mimicked the constellations reflected in the lake's surface. Professor Blackwood, despite his skepticism, began to theorize that the lake might be some kind of window between dimensions, a thin place where our reality touched something else entirely. But his rational mind couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing, and the contradiction began to tear at his sanity. The breaking point came on their final night. The team was preparing to leave when the guide, a Cree elder named Thomas Crowfeather, revealed something he had been hiding. His people knew of this lake. They called it the Eye of the Star Demons, and it was forbidden to even speak of its location. He had only agreed to guide the expedition because he believed it was his duty to witness what the white man's curiosity would bring upon them. According to Crowfeather's grandfather, the lake had appeared overnight sometime in the 1870s, after a star fell from the sky. But it wasn't a meteorite. It was something else, something that carried within it the essence of a place that existed outside our universe. The fallen star had opened a wound in reality itself, and through that wound, alien intelligences were watching, waiting, learning. That final night, as if responding to the revelation of its true nature, the lake began to sing. Not with any sound that human ears could properly hear, but with a vibration that resonated in their bones, their teeth, their very souls. The alien constellations in the reflection began to pulse with increasing intensity, and Professor Blackwood swore he could see massive shapes moving just beneath the surface of the water. The photographer, Rutherford, had replaced his broken Cameron was attempting to document these final phenomena when something reached up from the depths and pulled him in. There was no splash, no sound, no disturbance of the water's surface. He simply sank beneath the black mirror, as if the lake had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. The remaining team members fled immediately, but they were changed by what they had witnessed. Professor Blackwood never published his findings, and spent the rest of his life in voluntary isolation, refusing to discuss the expedition. Graduate student Walsh became obsessed with theoretical physics, specifically the mathematics of parallel dimensions, until she disappeared entirely in 1942, leaving behind only notebooks filled with equations that mainstream science still considers impossible. Thomas Crowfeather returned to his people and convinced them to perform a binding ceremony around the lake's location, a ritual designed to prevent the alien influences from spreading beyond its shores. But he warned that the bindings wouldn't hold forever, and that someday, something would come through that could not be stopped. The final expedition to Lake Stellaris took place in 1957, led by a government task force investigating reports of unusual astronomical phenomena. In the Canadian wilderness, this team was different from the previous ones, consisting of military personnel, scientists, and individuals whose names remain classified to this day. What little information has leaked from this expedition is deeply troubling. Satellite imagery from that time shows the lake's location as a perfect circle of absolute darkness, as if light itself refused to touch its surface. Radio communications from the team became increasingly garbled and strange, with operators reporting that the voices sounded like they were speaking backwards or in languages that predated human civilization. The final transmission from the expedition consisted of a single word repeated 73 times, ascending. After that, silence. When the recovery team reached the site 3 weeks later, they found no trace of Lake Stellaris. The perfectly circular depression was still there, but it was now filled with ordinary soil and vegetation that looked decades old. The only evidence that a lake had ever existed was a collection of smooth black stones arranged in patterns that perfectly matched the alien constellations documented by previous expeditions. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. In recent years, amateur astronomers around the world have begun reporting strange phenomena in their observations. New stars appearing in positions where none should exist. Constellations that seem to shift and change when viewed through telescopes, but remain fixed to the naked eye. And always, the sensation that something vast and intelligent is looking back at them through the lens. Dr. Morrison's journal was donated to the Royal Astronomical Society after her death, but most of it remains sealed in their archives, deemed too disturbing for public release. However, her final entry, written on the day she died, has been leaked online in recent years. It reads, "They are not stars at all. They are eyes. Infinite eyes watching us from beyond the veil. The lake was their pupil, and through it, they studied us as we study insects under a microscope. But the pupil is closed now, and they have learned enough. They know where we are. They know what we are. And soon, very soon, they will come calling." Perhaps most disturbing of all, satellite mapping projects have identified 73 other locations around the world where perfectly circular depressions exist, with no geological explanation for their formation. Most are in remote, unexplored regions, but 3 are located within 50 miles of major population centers and on clear nights. When the moon is dark and the atmosphere is still, people living near these sites report seeing reflections of alien stars in puddles, in windows, in any surface that can hold the image of the sky. They report hearing that same bone-deep singing that Professor Blackwood's expedition documented, and they report the growing sensation that something vast and patient is watching them from above, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The question isn't whether Lake Stellaris was real. The question is whether it was the only one, and whether the eyes that watched through it are still watching through others. Next time you look up at the night sky, remember Dr. Morrison's words. Remember that the stars you see might not be the only ones looking back at you. And if you ever find yourself near a perfectly still body of water on a dark night, do yourself a favor. Don't look at the reflection, because some doors once opened can never be closed again. And some things that watch from beyond the stars are better left undisturbed. Sweet dreams.